Welcome to GovCast, connecting with federal IT's top decision makers. I'm Alexander Bolova, production lead at GovCIO Media and Research. With me today is Deputy Editor Kate Macri. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Alex.
You had the chance to talk with Jay Bonci, CTO at the Department of the Air Force. How'd it go?
It went really well. I was really excited to talk to Jay some more about data interoperability and how the Air Force is kind of leading the way in terms of some cloud modernization efforts and integration with the Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability Contract. Similar to my interview with Don Yeski, these are both interviews basically about the same topics. I wanted to hear from both of them about this. Don Yeski being the CTO of the Department of the Navy. So I've talked to Jay a couple of times before for an article back in February, and then also a GovFocus like a month or two ago. So it's always great to talk to Jay because he's really in the weeds with the technology and really knows what's going on at the Air Force. And so, yeah, it was a fun conversation.
Yeah, and if listeners haven't already, we definitely encourage you to go back and listen to our Don Yeski interview from 2 weeks ago, as well as to look at our GovFocus interview with Jay Bonci. So before we listen to your conversation, are there any highlights that you'd like to point out in advance? Anything that you want to call attention to for our listeners?
I feel like towards the end of the interview, there was some really interesting discussion around the role that the CTO has at the Department of the Air Force and how he kind of has to bridge the gap between some of the more bureaucratic pieces of the Pentagon and airmen on the ground or in the air, I guess, with real problems that they need solved by someone in a position like his. So it was really cool to hear about how he navigates that and what that kind of looks like. It sounds like a very big job as CTO, but it was also interesting to hear about that because I feel like in a lot of ways he's carrying on the legacy of Lauren Knausenberger, the outgoing CIO at the Air Force, because that was her whole thing, was cutting through the bureaucracy of the Pentagon to get real solutions into the hands of airmen and solve their problems with IT and really elevate IT as something that is important that we should be spending money on, which, as a lot of people know, IT budgets tend to be the first things to get slashed when making budget cuts. So yeah, it was really interesting to hear about his perspective on that and kind of how he's continuing the work that Lauren started to do.
Yeah. And I'm just full of shameless plugs today, but we also had a recent exit interview with Lauren Knausenberger as part of an event. You can listen to both that podcast as well as watch the interview by going to our website. But with all of that in mind, let's take a listen to your conversation with Jay Bonci.
To start off our conversation today, Jay, I would love to hear from you about what you've been working on this year in terms of your IT priorities. And I'm really interested in hearing about where the Air Force is at in terms of the Joint Warfighting Cloud capability, how that integrates with all of your other ongoing cloud efforts that you've already been working on, and kind of what you guys are looking at this year in terms of new investments, new modernization initiatives that you're working on.
All right, great. So for my personal focus this year has been really taken up by the different pillars of Zero Trust. Zero Trust is a huge buzzword. It's an absolutely massive umbrella of a lot of type of capabilities. We have a lot of responsibilities set out to us by DoD CIO and our CPG capabilities plan and guidance. But what this means for us is that it's not a product. It is an architectural imperative. And the amount of execution coordination and kind of government pre-integration, that blocking and tackling work to make sure that the capabilities are sequenced in the right order and we know who's doing them and who has to talk to whom in order to be able to make it work is pretty staggering. So for instance, we just started our ITAS Wave 1 contract after a significant delay. And now that we are moving out on that capability, we know that there are zero trust capabilities embedded in that endpoint. And we know that that has to talk to the ICAM capabilities provided by a different team. And we know that that has to integrate with the network, which is provided by all the different match comms and more centrally in the future through our base infrastructure modernization effort. And so just making sure that all the parties kind of know who their left and their rights are, make sure that we have a clear vision and sequencing for how we're going to deliver those capabilities has been key. We put together a Zero Trust and ICAM roadmap, which we initially published this year and kind of unveiled at the Rocky Mountain Cyberspace Symposium. We're publishing the 1.1 version of those capabilities somewhere in along the end of June. And that will allow us to incorporate all of the feedback that we've gotten from industry, our MilDEC partners, and our internal stakeholders about the progress that we've made in the last quarter. And that means we'll be tacking on the first quarter of 25 into that as our execution roadmap becomes a little bit more clear. And so we're excited to have that engagement and that transparency with industry and others in the top of the space, because it's huge that there are a lot of lessons to learn from industry and from other very large organizations, even outside of the government, who try to tackle zero trust for a really massive set of organizations. I mean, in the same way that the military is like any corporation that's done a lot of mergers and acquisitions, we have different technologies and different pieces across the world, and making sure that we can make that more even and make that more and have more consistent outcomes across the department, I think is key to zero trust and sort of JADC2 in the future. The specific area of focus for me for the last couple of months has been talking about the future of resilient communications. And this is key to our battle network with our C3 BM partners. The new PEO stood up under General Lou Cropsey. They're putting together the infrastructure necessary to run our command and control networks. And it's incumbent that the enterprise work with them in lockstep so that we can be there to scale and extend the things that they're putting together in 23 and 24. And so it's been a great partnership. We're making excellent progress, and we're going to publish our roadmap for how we're going to get that done in conjunction with our AFMC, LCMC partners, the CCC, ACC, that entire group. And we're going to put something out, we believe, in the middle of June on that. And so we'll be talking about that more once it hits the SAFCN website.
Yeah. So I'm interested in the relationship between Zero Trust and JADC2 and JWCC. Could you explain for me a little bit?
Sure.
Those three big, huge topics and
kind of there's a lot of acronyms, a lot of acronyms, and a lot of activity going on in the joint world. That's one of the kind of key challenges of this role for me, is to make sure that we are telling a clear story about the individual pieces that inform each other and are loosely connected. But then, how do we really take that down to execution? So let's start with JWCC. JWCC is an effort by DoD, CIO, DISHAC, and others to provide a consistent buying vehicle to allow for competition and aggressive discounting on cloud. And we are working with that program office to figure out how to integrate it into our existing Cloud One program office. And so for us, that focus is really going to be on the secret and top secret areas in the beginning to be able to make sure that we can continue to access high quality cloud environments at the secret and top secret levels where they have done the kind of contract legwork necessary. Some of those clouds have their beginnings inside the Intel community, and having a centrally established relationship between the DoD cloud offices and the IC cloud offices is a huge administrative hurdle off our back. And so we're incredibly grateful to DoD CIO for having pulled that together. We are going to be working with them to make sure that we continue to drive best practices around aggressive pricing to make sure that we get the best discount for the department and for the taxpayer. But by and large, JWCC is at its current time that cloud buying vehicle to make it sort of easy and consistent across the board. Ourselves and C-Army both have established cloud programs, so we are looking together about how we integrate that buying option into our current space. In terms of how that relates to JADC2. JWCC and cloud broadly is a part of the underlying infrastructure. And we know that in a conflict situation, it's going to be incumbent on us to be able to scale rapidly. And the kind of hyperscaling might of our commercial cloud industry partners is going to be truly the only way to do that. We're never going to be able to have enough hardware sitting around in a depot. We're never going to have the pipes we need just laying around. And so making sure that we partner early and strongly with those true hyperscalers is going to be a key to success. But layered on top of that is where the additional hard work comes in. And that is to be able to make sure that we have the application and data interchange standards between all of the joint partners to be able to get to a place where we can move data back and forth seamlessly, that we can move intelligence back and forth seamlessly, orders back and forth seamlessly. And that's sort of above the infrastructure, that application tier challenge is the one that is going to be the real struggle to tackle.
Yeah, it sounds like data interoperability is like really the key for JADC2 to be JADC2, I guess.
Yeah.
And where do you see JWCC, I guess, helping to facilitate that kind of data interoperability? And I'm also interested in the cybersecurity piece of that, because you have to have secure data exchange between the services, combatant commands.
Sure.
And so I guess my question is, how do you see JWCC helping to facilitate greater data interoperability between the Air Force and combatant commands and Navy, Army, like all the different players? And what role does the Zero Trust initiatives play in helping to make that reality?
Sure. I don't want to over or undersell the role of JWCC or by extension, cloud service providers in JADC2. They're going to be incredibly important for us to have infrastructure that is consistent. They have a service model that will allow us to deploy capabilities in a more rapid way. So that's the huge advantage of cloud and that infrastructure as code and the DevSecOps revolution that's sweeping across the department and across our major weapon systems is going to be key to having the agility and flexibility to end up in a consistent place for JADC2 in cloud, and the infrastructure flexibility and the underlying services of the cloud are absolutely key to get there. For, in particular, JWCC at the higher classification levels will be acting as a data layer where the clouds are going to be able to talk to the other clouds, and within the cloud enclaves themselves. At the end of the day, clouds these days, large commercial infrastructure providers, whether or not they're providing bespoke government capabilities or not, are at the end of the day carriers. They are huge telecommunication giants on top of that. And we know that the telecommunications backbone of these major cloud providers is going to be a place where data interchange happens at the classification levels where it needs to. And so we are fully looking to take advantage of that strategy to bolster the DISA provided and the COCOM provided telecommunications elements. And so that is going to be a part of our architecture, our design, and our strategy going forward. When it comes to the bringing people together, there are provisions within the JWCC contract around making sure that data can flow more freely, around setting standards for resilience. And those are huge things that contract office is taking on for us for the department. And as a consumer of that, we are quite grateful. And now, as it relates to Zero Trust, to answer your Zero Trust question, the Zero Trust initiatives are going to be challenging because we are still very nascent in everyone's Zero Trust delivery. And the way that most Zero Trust architectures and products work is that there are not necessarily emergent standards on it. And so this is part of the government pre-integration challenge that we sort of alluded to up front, which is that it is going to require a ton of planning to make sure that our consumption of a product makes sense, but then we also have an answer for joint and COCOM environments, so that a person with a Navy laptop can work on an Air Force application or an Air Force data set. So all of that is going to take a long time product-wise to be able to get right. The things that we are doing right now in the early days are making sure that our data formats are as internally consistent as possible, and that we are using the same messaging formats and are getting applications ready to be able to speak the same formats of data. And so we have a lot of joint work that's going into defining those standards. But we know at the end of the day, as an enterprise service provider, that having a good, strong data fabric that's going to be able to translate messages between the two is going to be key, because we don't know what maturity each of the joint partners are going to come into this environment with. And so we could be very far behind. Some other partner could be very far ahead, or we're all going to be each in slightly different states. And so to make that work, we have to, that flexibility is a built-in requirement to what we're putting together in Data Fabric and some of our other data interchange initiatives.
Yeah, I feel like that's something I've been hearing a lot from folks across DoD, what you were just talking about, like how are we going to securely exchange information if, one of us is more ahead in their zero trust journey than the other, for example, or, like what you were saying, like someone, can take a Navy laptop and sign into Air Force Cloud or something like that. And one of the ideas that I've heard floated, and I'm sure you've heard people talk about this, maybe this is something you think as well, is DoD should maybe have a universal single sign-on capability, so that no matter which component or combatant command you're part of, you can sign in once and get the information that you're cleared to have that you need to do the mission, and it can compensate for potential security disparities, stuff like that. Is that something that you guys have thought about, talked about? Is that
we've thought about that? We've thought about that a ton.
Yeah.
There are a lot of challenges, and this isn't a DoD problem. This is like any large organizational problem to be able to say, okay, everybody kind of stop what you're doing and adopt this new universal, enterprise of enterprise capabilities. The DoD itself is unique in its size and scope, and faced with a truly global set of challenges. But outside of admiring the problem, there are steps that we're taking in order to be able to get there, so that we know, for instance, we're pulling together the next generation of our identity services, what we're kind of calling AFID 2.0. And as we begin to design that, we know, hey, there are future federation and convergence use cases we're going to need, right? And so flexibility is going to have to be built into the design of how we pull this together, and how we work with the Army and the Navy and the Fourth Estate to get to, again, a consistent end state. To get to that all-in enterprise of enterprises, there is a lot of flattening that has to be done in terms of, again, agreeing on data standards, right? So it's not JADC2 or targeting or weapons data, it's identity data, right? And making sure that we're using the same names and we have the same fields, and all of our relying parties know what to expect. So there is the unification of service designs. We are talking in small communities about how to get that right, and about we are converging on very similar design patterns right now, so that we can get to an eventually consistent all-together place. And what that's going to allow us to do is we need to be able to innovate locally and partner globally. And that's going to be kind of the model that we need to really make it work. So in that sense, trying to jump to an all-in DoD single sign-on DoD OI to ICAM solution today isn't feasible, just on the scale of enablement that would have to happen.
Yeah.
To have a centralized identity office that could take, let's assume there's 10,000 applications in the DoD, right? To be able to pull 10,000 applications through, we'd be talking 50 apps onboarding a day to make any real progress. I mean, it's just a staggering amount of work that you need to do to be able to make it happen. But knowing that we have to get there, we're looking to federate at the data level.
Okay.
We all have a global credential in the Common Access Card, and so we can federate at the credential level. And that's really how we do a lot of the federation today, right? If we all work together and converge more and more on the PIV standard, which is largely accomplished, then that will get us there, and we'll be able to get there in a pinch. And I think it won't allow us to do anything much more sophisticated until we get more services nailed down to get to that real true, all-in-one zero trust, but we'll be able to figure out how to get by without any of the parties having to take major risk to get there. So I feel good about our architectural approach. I don't think that we're truly developing anything in a vacuum or in a silo. And again, having the ICAM roadmap allows us to be pretty open source about what we're doing and when. And if there are opportunities or possibilities to partner, like we're partnered with the Army on a great many things, then we're certainly going to take those up so that gap to close to converge in the future will be much smaller.
Sure. So what challenges do you foresee coming up over the next year as you guys are working to kind of keep modernizing in the cloud while also participating in JWCC?
For us, our Cloud One journey has been really strong, and we've surpassed 100 apps a few months ago. They had a big get together for that. As we look out to where the next 100 are, we're looking at applications that may not be as ready to go to cloud, and this is a little bit of the problems of this type of a program or this type of an enablement arc, where at the very beginning, you're going to get, they're maybe not all in the most technically sophisticated place, but they're all the ones who are very eager to go to cloud. And then you get the ones that are a little bit less eager and needed more help or needed a chance to really be convinced on it. What's going to happen as we go through zero trust and as we start to discover more and more of what's on our network, we're going to find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of assets that are going to need a real true home. And the discussions that we're having now is, what does that mean for Cloud One if we're going to have to take hundreds of applications that maybe aren't in the best place, either from a security or an ATO perspective? And we're still grappling with that. That's going to be one of the really core challenges for us. And zero trust is going to be the thing that breaks a lot of applications' dependence on the network. And that means it's going to unearth these capabilities, and we're going to have a series of options for them to go to, whether or not it's a digital platform like a SharePoint or a SaaS provider or some kind of workflow platform. Right? There's going to be lots of options that we have to go through before saying, okay, this is bespoke code that has to go to cloud. And so that decision-making process is something that we have to set up and make sure that the enterprise is properly messaging and is ready to support. We're also pulling together guidance for what to do with applications that maybe don't have proper ATOs. And so we're trying to think through that problem set as well. So there's both technical and business and policy implications to the cloud of dust that we know we're going to get kick up as we begin to kind of sweep the basement out and find all of those applications.
Gotcha. Interesting. So what role do you see the software factories playing in all of this, especially when we're talking about JWCC and that kind of shift?
Yeah, software factories play an incredibly important role because they're the ones who are most structurally aligned with agility. And so all the software factories have set themselves up to say, okay, we're going to be modern software development houses. We are going to work in an agile fashion. We're going to do strong backlog management. We're going to receive user feedback. We're going to try and shorten the distance between developer and operator as much as what is possible, given classification constraints. And then where that sets them up for success is that we don't know all the requirements for JADC2. We have lots of very smart people who are working on planning and going after the things that we know and data standards and some application elements and kind of dreaming up architectures. But until we get further down into the meat of actually fusing these systems together and making sure that, air planning system A can talk to Navy sensor system B,
right,
and going through those use cases as prioritized by our theater commanders, the 3 component, to figure out, okay, we know today that the number one requirement is agility. It's the ability to rapidly respond to incoming data, to incoming operational conditions. And that's that energy and that competency to be able to have contracting setups that enable that, to have people who are ready to turn on a dime and work on the new capability, to have the tooling in place to know how to respond to new application conditions. That baseline is the baseline we're going to need for JADC2. And I'm really glad that this has been underway for a number of years. We are going to have to continue to refine, continue to standardize, continue to figure out what the enterprise needs to support from the software factories, because they each do it a little bit differently today. Most of them are based upon our Platform One capabilities, and many of them use Cloud One or a direct contract with one of the cloud service providers. So just trying to pull that together more to find the things that we can take off of the software factory's plate and let them try and get them as much as possible out of the infrastructure business and try and keep them in the agility, responsiveness, DevSecOps business. That's the kind of give and take and where we need to be from a department.
Gotcha. Okay. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and hear a little bit about how you got to where you are at the Air Force. I know you have had a career in IT and tech for basically your whole career, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've been in this field. So I guess my first question is, what made you want to go into IT, which is, I guess most people would consider probably one of the more boring careers that you could choose.
No, don't say that. That's not true.
What made you interested?
So I had always loved the challenges and the puzzle of computing, right? And to try and see like how System A worked with System B. And growing up, I think everyone has I grew up with my family's computer series of stories where they sort of tinkered around and learned how things worked and took things apart and stared for hours at the disk defragmenter, wondering what that actually did. But for myself, I grew up kind of through a computer science background. I was a programmer. I went up through kind of software QA, and then I ended up through a series of contacts in the open source world. And so I worked on various open source projects through Debian and others, and ended up in web infrastructure, just broadly, like early post.com web infrastructure and scalability, and in support of the open source world. And from there, ended up at a company by the name of ICAM that does internet scale content distribution. Learned a lot there. Spent 14 years there learning really just how the internet works and how the internet scales, and learned to tune my skills as a person who understands very large systems, understands how to communicate the intricacies of very large systems, what the kind of social and organizational implications of those systems were, and grew up from an individual contributor to be kind of a senior director where I was leading what happened to be the public sector business unit. Did not at all intend to end up in a government job, and the opportunity came up to kind of serve and make an impact on the government side, and I always thought like, I do okay there. I think I could figure that out, right? And for me, it was always the challenge of how do you effectively lead an organization by influence? How do you, take one of the largest scalability problems in the world, right? The cybersecurity and technical integration of the components inside of the Department of Defense, and get that to a consistent, excellent set of outcomes. Like we watch military structures struggle because they aren't set up to deliver IT. They're not set up to deliver technology, and they're not set up to deliver integrated outcomes, which is really what we see struggling with JADC2 broadly. And so I thought like, oh, that'd be an interesting problem set. And so I took that job, or this job, I guess, a couple of years ago. It'll be 2 years in August. It's been an absolutely wonderful experience. And I am learning kind of the lessons that I wanted to learn, right? The communication and, stakeholder management and each of those things. And so it's been a journey to learn how to be a CTO. There's the title CTO itself means so many different things in so many organizations, and is very much defined by your personal interests. Sometimes, you're leading a product, other times you're leading IT delivery. And this is, as a part of the office of the Chief Information Officer under Lauren Knausenberger, this is very much delivery focused. And so yeah, it's been a lot of really great lessons about the culture of large organizations and how they're truly no different than any other absolute gigantic corporation.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what's the most surprising thing that you've learned as a CTO in one of the, maybe the biggest organization in the world?
Yeah, it's surprising to me the cultural implications of power distance. That's one of the most interesting things in that, you come into a government role, especially a military government role, and the hierarchy is very hierarchical.
Right.
And my job is unique in that I have to talk to, people who are working at that AO level, right? Your captains, your lieutenant colonels, and then I have to be able to turn around and talk to, 1s through 4 stars and say, this is what's actually going on. This is what it means. These are the decisions we have to make. And sometimes it's leading decision-making for lower level technical teams. Sometimes it's leading strategic communications. And so every day is a little bit different. But that gap in the organization between what senior leaders are told or what senior leaders understand and what the technical level AO people are saying across, especially in the Air Force, where we are across all these different delivery tribes, that's very interesting to me, how that gets constructed and how best to make it so these organizations with slightly different mandates and slightly different roles and areas where they excel in different areas and in different ways, to make that consistent and to make that hum has been such an education.
Yeah.
But that, just trying to understand the kind of culture, the long-term culture of public sector employees and public sector organizations has been incredibly interesting.
Yeah. Would love to hear a little bit more about the role culture plays in DoD and the Air Force in particular when it comes to, trying to move the needle on some of these technology initiatives that you're in charge of, especially when it comes to, translating what people of lower rank, like farther down the hierarchy, are saying and needing, and communicating that to senior leadership and what that looks like.
So one of the key challenges in the Air Force and the DoD broadly is about the IT delivery value stream. And something that we need to continue to focus on through this year and ongoing is the digital transformation of the IT process itself. We talk a lot about digital transformation for mission systems and for applications and for other types of business processes, but the IT delivery process itself needs that. And what we see culturally is that we've assigned these roles to individuals and say, okay, you're in charge of strategy. And then once that strategy is done, you box it up and you hand it over to the requirements people. The requirements people box it up and write requirements, and they box that up and they write a concept of operations around it. And that concept of operations goes to acquisition, which sources something and buys it. And what happens is when you have this departmental look at parts in the value stream, you don't end up delivering something that has an even and well understood end-to-end delivery. And this is really hard in something like Zero Trust because it has to touch all these different things. This isn't like an airplane where you say, okay, we need the airplane to fly this high, be this maneuverable, take this much gas and have this many weapons on it. Okay, next person, right? And so IT is much more flexible and much more malleable than that. There's many, many different types of solutions. There's many, many different ways to be able to get at something. And so the cultural impacts of having these siloed departments is incredible on the outcome of IT. It's based on something called Conway's Law, which is this ancient observation from like the 60s or 70s that says computer systems mimic the organizational structures that created them, which is to say, and this is the whole thing behind JADC2. If you have two components that were designed far apart and the people didn't talk to each other, the things they build won't talk to each other. And that observation is true in the 70s. It's true now.
Yeah.
And so part of the challenge of bending that culture to get better outcomes is sometimes you have to better align the people. So some of the instances that we're doing right now is to say, okay, let's get everybody into the same Jira instance. Let's not think of ourselves as Air Combat Command and the Office of the CIO and Lifecycle Management Center. Let's think of ourselves as one flat IT delivery team where we have different specializations. And this is difficult because in a military organization, we don't tell people to emphasize flow, right? The flow of the movement of work, right? We tell people to emphasize roles and responsibilities.
Right.
And it seems like defining roles and responsibilities is important to be able to make sure that you have the course units of how things should interact, but really making sure that you're getting the blocking and tackling of IT delivery execution correct. That's more important than absolutely anything.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to produce good outcomes. That's going to produce better, more integrated systems. They're going to produce more secure systems. And one of the things that we found is it's going to produce systems that have better user experience.
Yeah.
And this is one of our huge lessons learned from the last year or so, is that integrating and flattening different organizations solve user experience problems that much faster. Because you don't have to take a ticket and be like, oh, my laptop is running slow. Oh, we're going to take that to the help desk, and maybe the help desk doesn't know. So they file a ticket with engineering, and maybe engineering doesn't know, or maybe this person hasn't moved. And the time, because of the cost of moving that workload is so high, the time it takes to actually resolve things is really tough. And so we try and get people to think less about wrapping ideas in PowerPoint, right? Where you have to give it to somebody else and that person interprets it. That's a high cost operation. And so we're really trying to get to a place where that's a lot flatter. And that's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
I think people are starting to see and understand just the volume of work we have in front of us for Zero Trust, and that reducing that transmission cost of ideas back and forth between departments is really the only way to make progress.
Yeah. So before we wrap this up here, what are your thoughts on your plan basically for addressing some of these challenges, just off the top of your head?
So for me, we started with the roadmap as an outcome focused view. So the exercise to pull together a roadmap is to say what's important. What are the early prototypes, the early innovators in the space? What are we going to do to support them? How do those innovators graduate? And then where do things need to come together, and in what time? And what are those tasks? And that outcome-focused view is meant to sort of say, okay, let's just focus on the stuff we have to do, and we can take that to the left and make sure our strategy says the right thing, and we can take that to the right and make sure our requirements say that thing. And so starting there has been really good to clarify the things that we need to do in Zero Trust and ICAM in the areas that we've done. But we shouldn't have to do that, right? From there, what we're trying to do is to go wide into an agile process to make sure that people are handling each of those elements in a way that is properly modeled and is flat and is being tracked in an all-in-one kind of workflow management platform. And from there, what that's going to allow us to do is eventually, I want the roadmaps to just be a snapshot of that agile backlog, right? We should just be able to just sort of hit print, and all the milestones are there, and it filters out ones maybe that are acquisitionally sensitive, and then we just sort of clean that up and hit publish. And if we're properly delivering on IT, and we have all of the tasks and the strategic intent and all of the milestones properly set up and tagged, then that's how I know that we will have truly changed our IT delivery model. And so we've got the endpoint in mind, and now we're kind of working backwards into a process that will make that an automated deliverable. And so that's my plan. I think it'll probably take another 18 months or so before we're pretty close on that. But the buy-in from the community and the work to invest in that type of process to get to that place is really heartening. We're making great progress on it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I don't have any other specific questions for you right now. So I just wanted to ask, is there anything else that you wanted to add or talk about quickly before we wrap up?
What I'll say is the DoD is headed towards a series of architectural discussions around coordination for zero trust. And because we are in so many different places about where we're at on our journey, it's going to start to hold us up or force people to make decisions where it may be hard to reverse those. And so, I'm just I'll just plug making sure that we're all pretty open about where we're at on our journey, and we all are pretty clear-eyed about how we're coming together. So for instance, one of the things that we struggle with is there's not going to be a consistent device health standard, right? If you use one device health product or one endpoint protection suite and another endpoint protection suite, how do I know that a Navy laptop contacting an Air Force service is fully patched or is clean? And you don't. And so paradoxically, getting to zero trust is going to require a lot of trust and coordination between the services to be able to define those standards, to be able to make sure that we are all understanding the nuances of the problem the same way. And it's just going to have to be continued discussion between the architects and technical stakeholders. And so we're getting there. I'm impressed with the progress that everybody's made in a short period of time. It's never fast enough, but I'm happy we're moving down.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've got your work cut out for you this year.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jay. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kate. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thank you, Kate. That was a fascinating conversation. Before we let our listeners go, are there any last takeaways you want to leave them with?
I guess I would say the Air Force is doing some really cool stuff with cloud and with software development. And it's really cool to see how the software factories are supporting that effort. I really feel like the software factories are giving the Air Force kind of a leg up in terms of tech innovation compared to some of the other DoD components. And, they're kind of a trendsetter in that regard because the Marine Corps just launched their own software factory. The Navy has a software factory as well that was recently launched in the last few years. And the Army Software Factory also was recently launched in the last few years, again, all because of stuff that the Air Force has been doing. So I think one of the interesting things to look for will be how these different little software factory innovation hubs in DoD are going to impact what JWCC looks like and how cloud kind of takes shape across all the military service branches and the fourth estate.
Gotcha. Well, if there was one branch of the military I would expect to fully embrace cloud, it would be the Air Force. Get it? Because air, cloud. Please clap. Anyways, thank you, Kate. Listeners can tune in next week for a brand new GovCast. But until then, that's all for today's episode. If you like what you heard, please leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice. Give us 5 stars. I'm Alexander Bolova.
I'm Kate Macri.
Thank you for listening. GovCast, along with HealthCast and Cybercast, is a production of GovCIO Media and Research. For more podcasts and to check out the other shows, head to govciomedia.com. Watch out for new episodes released every Tuesday and Wednesday across our shows. You can follow all of them on your favorite podcast platform. And if you like what you heard, make sure to let us know by leaving a review. And if you have any topics you think we should look into, contact us at newsletter@govcio.com.